So it seems totally appropriate for me that in a lecture about anything regarding debate, you could show an image of reindeer butting heads. So it seemed appropriate for this particular lecture, which is a little bit on the short side, hopefully. And really that butting of heads can start before you even get into the issues, and it happens during the definition stage. So we're looking briefly today at definitions, triggers, and claims. So we already talked about this slide the other day. You've got the YouTube video from Ismo, who's the Finnish comedian who talks about the word shit and how it's hard to define what that actually means, or it has multiple meanings. We also looked at these in terms of which terms do we need to define before we have a decent debate. If we're going to talk about women being superior to men, we need to know what the definition of superior is. We probably don't need to define women and men for the purpose of the debate. We probably also don't need to define cats and dogs, but we probably need to define what it means to be a better pet. And the same with being an only child. Again, that doesn't need any definition. Having siblings doesn't either. So whether it is better or not better would be the thing that would be defined. So you have to kind of look at the sentence to figure out what do you need to define in order to have a clear and fair debate. This leads me to this hot mess of a slide, which was our discussion the other day in class. If we look at the topic of women are superior to men, we would need to define the word superior, and you can do so according to the dictionary from the other day. It means, higher in rank, in status, or in quality. So that then you need to kind of figure out, if I'm going to argue that women are superior to men, I probably am not going to use maybe rank or status, because men still sort of hold a higher status than women in many arenas in the United States. Or if we look at the world, then it's even more obvious. But it might be the quality one is the one we're going to use for that definition. It might be that on the negative side they can agree to that, or they can refer to rank or status and say we want to redefine this, and it is their option to argue the definition and come up with an opposite one, as long as it seems reasonable and fair. So then we moved into defining other things, like, Fairfield is better than Vacaville. And so this is, wonderfully color-coded here, if you remember from the other day, that the Fairfield argument, if we say that, and I'm assuming this would be the affirmative stance, in other words, probably the status quo, is that Vacaville is a slightly better place to live than Fairfield. It's going to be my guess. And I live in Fairfield, but I would probably argue that this is still the affirmative statement here. So the affirmative side might say define better as employment opportunities, or they might define better as, slightly better weather conditions. It gets super hot in Vacaville. Or they might even say commute time to the Bay Area. You cut off, good 15 minutes at least of your drive. So those would all be ways in which we might define the word better. Whereas the people that are advocating for the Vacaville side might argue that, and we had this discussion in class, the crime rate is a little higher in Fairfield than it is in Vacaville, though Vacaville is certainly increasing. So it might be that they say better means safety, or maybe better means, again, maybe more convenient to, Tahoe, more convenient to skiing and such. So it might be a debate between being closer to the Bay Area and wine country, or being closer to Tahoe and casinos. That you could actually have a debate looking just at those. But both sides then have this issue called criteria, which is, if we're going to say one is better than the other, we need to have something that defines what that actually means. And that's what the word better or harmful will do in a claim. So this brings me up very quickly to what you need to know about definitions. This would be like for quiz stuff. It's just good to know all around. A couple of guidelines. One guideline is you want to use a definition that will allow both sides to potentially win. You don't want to skew it to the point where it seems unfair, because then the other team can, scream unfairness, and a judge will probably buy that. You also want to make sure that the definitions that you're using make the debate clearer. So, you don't want to make it so that we have no idea what we're actually arguing, because the definition is so unusual and like off topic, we don't know where we're going with this. So again, the idea with definitions is to make things clearer, not more difficult to understand. Third, if you want to use a dictionary, you can, but know that a dictionary doesn't always help, because sometimes we need to define a phrase, like is better than. You can certainly look up the definition for is and better and than, but that's not going to help you unless you unless you kind of create a definition for what is better than means. So it kind of depends on the topic that you're dealing with, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then finally, you want to make sure that you define the terms, not the single words, unless that word is important. Harmful is a good word. You know, justified is a good word to define. Those are single words, but they're also usually comparative, where it's more justified, less justified, or something is better or worse than something else. And then finally, you want to resist a literal definition, which is why we really don't need to define cats and dogs or men and women. And finally, we're up to the fun part here. So I'm at 5 minutes and running. So we're going to look at triggers. So that was definitions. Now we're going to look at trigger words, which is not that, and it's not that. It's not what triggers people emotionally. It's an actual word in debate, and it refers to the clues that you have that will tell you how the debate is going to proceed. So triggers, by definition, are a word or words in a claim that suggest how we need to go about proving what it is we want to prove in this particular topic. Or the opposite side, on the negative, then, is what do we need to clash with, and how do we need to then build our own case to support a status quo. So if your mother, for example, says, "You never clean up after yourself," if we look for the trigger word, I'm going to give you a moment here. You know what the trigger word is. It's that one. It's not you. You know what she means, and the cleanup is obvious and self-evident, and it obviously isn't yourself. It's going to be the never. And that's probably where you're going to have the argument with your mom is, I don't, you know, sometimes I do clean up my room. I don't never clean up my room. I actually clean up my room on occasion, just not to the frequency with which you would be happy. And that becomes then the operative word in this conversation. If your mom says, "Your sister always has to clean up after you," there's probably going to be a different trigger word. It's probably going to be "your sister," you know, in which case it's not the always, it's, well, yeah, but I do things for her, you know, that she doesn't do, and that becomes the point of the debate. So these words will let us know, kind of guide us as to what proceeds within the debate, and therefore what you need to prove. So trigger words in a debate are words like is or are, like women are superior to men. That would be a trigger word. It lets you know that this is a certain kind of debate. Words like desirable, undesirable, justified, unjustified would also be trigger words. That's the word that we have to define, and then we figure out what do we need to prove based on this. Better or not better, you know, something is better than something else is also a trigger word. And finally, the word should. And I kind of frequently use the term, you know, don't, you know, you need to should on your audience, or don't, you know, don't should on, you know, somebody else. And it means we always say that a lot is, you know, you hear people say you should exercise, you should do your homework, you should clean up after yourself, you should, you know, wash your car occasionally. So lots of shoulds abound. And so that tells us what kind of debate is also proceeding. And so if you look at these terms, in these terms we have that marriage is obsolete. The is the word that actually the is and the obsolete tell you where that debate is going. You have the is better than, more harm than good. Everybody should exercise. These all tell us something about the debate that's coming up, which leads me to my last slide, which is the trigger words indicate the type of claim that we're trying to prove or disprove. So if we look at terms like, and I'm going to cover this very briefly now and in more detail later, if we look at marriage is obsolete and athletes make too much money, these are known as fact claims. And a fact claim simply proves the existence or non-existence of something. And one of the ways in which you can tell that a fact claim is a fact claim is that it many times has a universal measurement. We don't see it in these two topics, but there's, you know, one, like if I said the Golden Gate Bridge is the longest suspension bridge in the world, that would be a fact claim because I simply pull out a ruler or you know, meter stick and I measure it, and then I measure all the other suspension bridges in the world, and I say, yes, this is the longest one. Okay, so many times there's a universal measurement, though not always. This is, again, an abbreviated discussion, which will go into greater detail. But these would be fact claims. Athletes make too much money. It either is or is not so. You either prove the existence that they make too much money, or you tell me that they don't make as much money. And we also need to know what the athletes are. So the definitions become part of the debate in this topic. So you can debate the definitions in a fact topic. Moving on to the second kind of claim, and there's only three. When you say cats make better pets than dogs, or cigarettes are more harmful than alcohol, you're actually doing a value claim. And the definition of a value is that a value means that something is better or not better, justified, not justified. You're proposing an attitude towards something. If I said being an only child is better than having siblings, that would be a value claim. I also think it's a fact, From an only child's perspective, it is so. But it would be considered a value claim in debate. So the value claims require a criteria or a weighing mechanism, like what do we mean by better? What do we mean more harmful? Are we looking at body count? Are we looking at impact to innocent people? Those are the things. Are we looking at quality of life? Those are all claims that require some way for me to measure those words, which aren't, as obvious to define. And these can also be debated as well. The value claim and the criteria can be, the criteria and the weighing mechanism can be debated. And finally, everyone should go to college. High school graduates should take a year off. You see the word should. Doesn't matter if it's an ought. Ought is a should as well. It's a good idea to do this might be, again, a value claim because it's a good idea or not a good idea. But whenever you see the word should, immediately default, this is a policy claim. Okay, and the policy is implying some kind of action. We should or should not do something. And as you know from the Jeopardy quiz review, the policy claim needs to show a compelling need, like a moral and compelling imperative to do something. So there's a need for change. And then part of that debate looks at the plan that the affirmative is trying to bring up to say, no, that's not a good idea, or it is a good idea, but we got a better idea. So the counter plan then is when the negative says, you've got a plan to solve a problem, but we have a better plan, and it's this. Okay. Again, we'll go into more detail on all of these, but just so you know that with a policy claim, policy claims definitely move into some kind of plan of action, whereas with a value claim, you're not implying that I do or not do anything. You're just telling me something is good or bad, justified or unjustified, and that's sort of where we're headed. So once we get through these debates, we'll be visiting this concept, I think, in a little bit more detail because it does affect sort of the prima facie burden that an affirmative and a negative, they both need to be prima facie, of what they need to prove in order to do the debates. So that's it for this quick mini lecture at 11 minutes and 45 seconds.